So, so we're going to talk about using AI to support authentic assessment. Before we do that, we should talk a little bit about what authentic assessment is. We encourage you to download a copy of the slides, which you can do by either putting in that tiny URL, which that was updated, or you can just scan the image, because I have put in the long URL before. I don't know why. And then you'll have your own copy of this in case, because it does link to a lot of resources that could potentially be useful. And we'll go through all of those. So, everyone got them? Let me just copy this. So if someone asks, or if you could grab a copy, and then put it in chat if someone asks, because we did have some people come in later. Okay, so one of the main reasons, a major reason for considering authentic assessment is that one of the reasons why students engage in academic integrity violations is because they don't see the meaning of what they're doing. They don't see that the work that they're doing is going to be really that important for their future. And there have been a large number of surveys suggesting that that issue has become much more severe. Because if students don't see that they're actually learning some useful skills, it opens up the potential, or it reduces the incentive to actually do the work that we're asking students to do. And 95% of high school students a couple of years ago indicated that they engaged in cheating. 64% on a test, 58% said with plagiarism in some form. And I don't know why that went out of there. Well, let's go back. Okay. I must have clicked on the link. In 2020, among undergraduates, this was right at the start of COVID, 32% cheated on exams, 2% submitted another student's work as their own, 28% submitted joint work when individual work was required. And the rates rose fairly dramatically during the pandemic, and I should have updated those, but we will at some point. And if you click on the copy link, by the way, you can get an updated one the next time we update these slides. So sorry about that. One of the things that happened in terms of the self-reported cheating rates in a study that was done last year, in terms of online instruction, prior to COVID, the self-reported rate of cheating on online exams was 29.9%, and it rose to 54.7% during COVID. And again, it's likely that that's underreported because this was a self-reported study. Okay, so, and one of the things we know is that pretty much any type of assignment we can give AI tools now can be answered pretty effectively with AI tools. It does incredibly well on multiple choice exams. It does really well on short answer, and it's getting better at essay questions.
Yep, absolutely. Like for a little while when, like back in 2022, we were talking about like different assignments that we might be able to give that were like AI proof, right? And it's not a thing anymore, right? So even thinking about like, if you've never used AI before, you think like, oh, well, maybe I could assign my students to do like a reflective essay. And unfortunately, like AI is so good that it will make up a whole backstory for you, right? With very little prompting, right? You could tell it just to write reflectively about, your cat, Spot, right? And like it will come up with like a whole thing that will be pretty convincing. You could tell it, well, like maybe, like now tie my relationship with Spot to like what I want to do in my future career, right? And you don't even have to tell it what kind of future career you want, and it will invent a whole narrative for you. So unfortunately, it's so good, right, at inventing material that there really aren't assignments that we can give that will be like workarounds. It can do pretty much everything in regard to writing anyway.
And about 2 months after ChatGPT was released, I did a workshop with the School of Ed. And one of the things that they suggest is, well, what about reflective essays? So I gave it a prompt about a new instructor teaching a math course in high school, reflecting on their experiences on the first day. And I wrote a really nice essay about the anxiety they felt walking into it, but the excitement they felt and seeing their students' faces light up as they learn these concepts. And it did did a really convincing job of simulating that type of reflective response.
And oftentimes too, as a final thought, like, if you're not sure, if you're using AI tools to help in some way and you're not sure where to start or what to do, oftentimes students will just put in the prompt, right? Like right off of the assignment sheet. And that will usually have guiding questions or things that, like are important for them to answer. So that will kind of help it also. So yeah, it is it's really good at answering.
And one of the things that
Questions.
worked for a period of about 7 or 8 months was putting in recent events because it didn't have access to that. That's no longer true. All of the AI tools now have access to search functions. They get regularly updated and they can go out and search the web and gather current information. So there's really no way of completely AI proofing assignments other than convincing students that there's some purpose to what they're learning and that if they use a shortcut, they're going to be shortchanged later because they won't have developed the skills they need to be successful later. And that's where authentic assessment can come in. Just a few more details. ChatGPT, this was put together as of a couple of years ago.
A couple years ago.
ChatGPT passed bar and MBA exams on the microeconomics test of understanding and college economics, which was something that was used to assess alternative teaching approaches in economics. It scores at the 99th percentile. And Chegg has pretty much experienced some really serious troubles. In fact, there's still a massive investor lawsuit underway as a result of the release of ChatGPT because Chegg was marketing itself as a resource to assist students. And it turned out that they were just being used for academic dishonesty. And pretty much student use of Chegg has plummeted because for about $1 more, well, they could either use a free version of ChatGPT or pay about $1 more a month than they were paying for Chegg. And it's no longer traceable in the same way that Chegg's output used to be. So some strategies that you can use if you want to completely reduce academic integrity concerns is have students use in-class written exams, which works until they start getting glasses where they can scan things into a response and get responses back that way. Or, is our goal really to prepare students to be exam takers? There is very little chance that most of our students, once they leave academia, will be taking a lot of multiple choice exams, or will be taking fill in the blank exams, or even short answer type exams.
And also there's, there are several accessibility related issues with only offering an in-class written exam to keep in mind or to consider.
Especially for neurodiverse students, for students who need accommodations in some form and so forth. So the purpose of authentic assessments is basically remind students that what they're doing is developing skills that they'll need either later in their education, especially for intro classes, or they're developing skills that might be useful in their later careers. And if students buy into that, and if they understand the importance of what they're doing, and if they see that the assignments they're being asked to do have some intrinsic value, they're much more likely to actually take the effort and do it. And so
kind of connected to that, to kind of speak to both of those, right? Developing skills that they'll need later in their education. I work a lot with first semester college freshmen. So for me in a writing classroom, it's very easy for me to say like, listen, I'm going to teach you things that will be transferable to other courses that you're going to take during your time here. So thinking about teaching skills like information literacy, especially finding credible sources, starting the research process, because it is a big process, right? So to kind of attack it at an introductory level, to understand generally what makes writing in college different from writing that they've done previously, right? Writing in college is really different from writing in high school. So let's talk about why that is. Let's talk about things like citation and how it's very important to understand citation now, because, in a 300 level class, it's less likely that somebody's going to sit down and talk you through the whole thing. Instead, they're going to expect you to use your resources, right? And you learn about those resources in an introductory writing course. And then thinking about later, right? Talking about the importance of, understanding how writing works, the purpose of writing, how we use it to communicate, how we write for different audiences, how we write for different purposes, and how understanding that, in most of your fields, even if you're not going into education, communicating, both written and oral, is a huge part of many, many, many jobs. Not all of them, but many of them. So kind of talking about how you can start now, right? You can do the skills that will help you get through the rest of college, and then those skills will continue to build for you after college.
And so using authentic assessments basically tie into the types of activities that students will see as being intrinsically valuable. So this is a definition that Grant Wiggins put together, who was one of the people who first talked about this concept, that it has to be something realistic. It has to be something that seems meaningful, that it's an activity that students could see themselves doing at some point. It requires some level of judgment and innovation. It asks the students to actually do the discipline so that, instead of just learning about principles of economics, you're actually using economic analysis in some type of a meaningful way. Instead of learning how to diagram sentences, you might actually be writing something of in some form that's going to be useful. And the best strategy is to try to replicate or at least simulate the way in which people are likely to be doing these things in personal or civic life in some way. And that you assess students' ability to efficiently and effectively use a repertoire of knowledge and skills to negotiate a complex task. In other words, the goal is to come up with real life scenarios, what will sometimes be referred to as wicked problems and so forth, where there's no clear solution, where you have to pull together knowledge from multiple sources. And by doing that, it also provokes some curiosity. It gets students more interest, it activates curiosity because they're not just plugging numbers into a formula they learned in a particular class. They're trying to solve some type of real world problem that may require them to pull knowledge from different disciplines that they work through.
Which is helpful for getting ready for life in the real world, because a lot of the times there's not one clear-cut correct answer, right? Like things are messy, things are complicated. So those sorts of things give them more practice and again, help them kind of transition from taking tests that have one right answer, right? To thinking about things in a bigger way.
And this is true this is based on many things, not just authentic assessment, but gives students the opportunity to rehearse, to try things, to practice things, to consult resources and get feedback and refine performance and products, because that's what they're going to be doing after they leave here, whether it's in graduate school and they're working on some type of a dissertation or a master's thesis, or whether they're going out into the world and doing some type of work where it's not going to be a simple multiple choice or fill in the blank type thing. So here's some examples. And we'd like some suggestions from people who are attending too. Student demonstrations are one way of doing that, where you have students demonstrate. For example, if you're doing a chemistry class, have students do some experiments in class and demonstrate for the class. Do collaborative group projects relevant for the discipline. Do empirical research if that's part of what the discipline does. Open pedagogy is something we've done a lot of workshops on over the years, but it could be creating a documentary, creating infographics, doing an archival or collation type project, having students create podcasts or books or create instructional videos. Realistic role playing is another strategy, and that's something that students tend to enjoy quite a bit. There's the Reacting to the Past series, which is available online, where you can create scenarios in almost any discipline where students reenact some type of critical activity or some interesting historical event in the discipline that's relevant. We had a series of workshops here that was put together by someone in astronomy who talked about the question of whether Pluto is a planet or not, and reenacting the different roles that people were playing in those debates, for example. Having students do interviews of people, it could be really helpful in many disciplines, certainly in communications, communication studies, or in broadcasting, or in journalism, or oral histories are also something that's quite good. And one of the things that happens with going back to the open pedagogy projects is that these are things that have intrinsic value outside of the classroom. They're not what David Wiley has called a disposable assignment, where they create this thing, they submit it to the instructor, and no one else ever sees it again. And often, if the students didn't save a copy of themselves, the student doesn't even save it again after the class is over. It just goes into that void of bright space, assignments, that once they lose access to the course, they never see it again, or any of the feedback of it again.
Yep. And I mean, just thinking, I'm still just looking at the list and thinking about some of the different things that my students have done. And, sort of like their reactions to doing these sorts of projects versus others, right? So thinking about like a collaborative group project I did for many years, I did like a podcast project with my students in English 102, where I put them in pairs and they created a podcast episode. When they wrote it, they recorded it, they shared it with the class. And then for many semesters, we partnered with the Smart Neighbors Project, which was something that Lee Wilson pioneered when she was here. And basically like a summary of that project was to make connections between the college and the community, the Oswego community. So my students did podcast episodes and interviewed different members of the community at the H. Lee White Maritime Museum. We did Man in the Moon Candies. They did the Rivers End Bookstore. And it was a really, really cool way for them to learn things like interview skills, for them to learn how to, this was when they had to write up their own transcription, right? Because the software wasn't like a thing, and things like that. And it was just a really cool way for them to see their skills sort of like applied in a way that seemed very relevant to them. Same thing with poster sessions, right? I really like doing posters with writing students because they spend all this time writing a paper, right? So they learn how to kind of like do the whole thing, but then like, can you condense it? Can you put it into like a one pager? And then the real like icing on the cake, right? Can you explain it? Can you talk about what you did and only refer to something that's like really kind of like succinct and concise? And those sorts of things kind of help them realize that they need several different skills in order to make it through something and not just one, which I think is really helpful for them to walk out of a class knowing how to do a few different things and not just the subject.
And I've had students for about 6 or 7 classes do also create podcast projects, a couple of them each semester, and they found it to be a really interesting and enjoyable experience. I was doing it mostly in most of the sessions were online classes, and it gave them a chance to talk to other students in ways that they generally don't, other than on discussion boards or perhaps some other type of assignment. And that worked really, really well. Basically, they were asked to take some concepts they were learning in class and apply them to some real world issue, to explain a policy issue or to explain something they observed in their own life or their own experiences or their family experiences. Some of them interviewed their parents to find out information about their educational journey, for example. Others would talk about their experience in a labor economics class with their employers. Those were ones they didn't want to share publicly because they were talking about some of the issues with their employer, where perhaps the employer was not being as efficient as they could be or as rational as they could be. And I've also had students do book projects, I think 5 times, where they create something and they get to share it. And they really appreciated the fact that they had something that after they left the class, they could share with their parents, with their friends, and with potential employers, because it's a sample of their work that shows them at their best. And that results in so much more incentive to work on that. We'll see how that goes with AI. It wasn't used very much last time, other than a little bit of brainstorming last year. But I'll be doing something like that this spring as well. And poster sessions are so much more fun. I started doing them in my econometrics class about 3 or 4 years ago. And what happened was, before that, I had students put a PowerPoint slide together and present something. One person was presenting, everyone else was sitting there nervously waiting their turn. But instead, when they have their posters up on the wall, they're spending the whole time explaining it to people. So instead of a 7 or 8 minute presentation, they're spending a whole class period explaining it to other people and responding to questions. They enjoy it so much more, and I found it much more enjoyable than sitting through the same type of presentations from some really nervous students. community service projects, some of the things you mentioned fit into that.
Yep.
The NACE competencies, which have been expanded quite a bit recently, one of which, well, there's some talk about incorporating AI into that. I don't think it's made it there yet. But the NACE competencies that's the National Association of College and Employers, and they do a regular survey asking firms what types of skills are important for students to have as they enter the labor force, and areas where students may not line up very well in terms of the skills they've acquired. And if we share those NACE competencies and build them into our course, build it into the syllabus, and explain, as Stephanie was saying, that these are things they're going to be doing later, it can really help. I've also had students do a number of other alternatives to essays, where some students have chosen to write and perform a song for the class or record it and then have it shared with the class. Marketing classes, you could have an ad campaign, for example. If you could give students some code in a programming class that's not working and ask them to debug it, although AI does that pretty well now. And poetry or short story collections.
Yeah, we have, I mean, one of the things that I really love that creative writing does is the capstone poetry course has them pull together what's called like a poetry chapbook at the end, and the students like do the whole thing, right? They write the poems that go in it, and then they actually make the book, and then they have like a reading at the end of the semester, which I think is a really wonderful thing, right? It's like a product, like a takeaway that they have. In the 300 level poetry writing class that I teach, I've had them do something that I called like a digital poem, which was really similar to like digital storytelling, where they had to take something that they wrote and then turn it into a visual, right? A series of visuals, like a very short movie. They had to record themselves reading it, and that was really challenging for them because, they can see themselves as writers, but like now, are you reading? Are you thinking about your imagery? Is your pacing good? All of those sorts of things. And some students do like really outstanding things with these projects. So it's nice to see them also kind of push outside whatever boundaries I had imagined with the assignment to begin with, because many of them are so creative.
And there's nothing more tedious than reading, say, 40 or 50 responses to the same essay prompt on an exam. But listening to their creative work, listening to their podcast, watching the videos they create, listening to the songs they created, it's so much more enjoyable for us and for them. And it's so much more memorable that when they engage in some type of alternative project like this, it's something that's different from what they've been working on in most of their other classes. And as a result, it's going to stick with them a lot longer, and it's going to form more connections to the content than they're likely to have with standard exams or essay assignments.
And again, like for anyone who teaches, I mean, I primarily teach freshmen, right? So like for anyone who teaches a lot of freshmen, it's kind of like a breath of fresh air for them, especially, I think, right? Because they're kind of coming here and they're getting an opportunity to so for example, like I teach in the EOP summer program, right? And I had them do a writing assignment there, but I gave them guidelines, but they were able to choose their topics, right? And I wanted them to pick something that they felt passionate about. And probably 90% of the students in my class told me that that was the first time ever they were able to choose their own topic. Right. So like even something small like that is huge for them, right? Because they don't get those sorts of opportunities. So I think we can make a really good impression on them, a really big impression on them if we give them those choices a little earlier on.
And there's a lot of research on what's becoming increasingly called autonomy supportive instruction techniques. Jed Lakio gave a workshop on that last week. And it's also very closely related to UDL. We're giving students more autonomy over the types of activities, the way they demonstrate learning, over their choice of topic, results in increased motivation, increased students' grades in classes, and increased persistence. And it's also instructors who've been surveyed on this in randomized controlled experiments find that those assignments are much more interesting and engaging than others. So that giving students more flexibility and more choice is beneficial, and there's a growing amount of evidence on that. one of the things following up on our session 2 hours ago, or 3 hours ago, whenever that was, is that perhaps AI tools could be used to create some authentic assessment, where you could use a survey to gather information on student interests and career goals. And you could download the survey as a spreadsheet, replace the student names with a pseudonym or a numeric identifier, because you don't want to be feeding student names and other personal information into an AI tool, and ask the AI tool to generate suggestions for authentic learning activities related to a specific learning objectives that aligns with the interests of each student. And I think, did I not put in a link to the form? What I intended to do here, it's been a challenging couple of weeks, but let me check the folder. I think there should be, there's some things cluttering up the screen that you guys don't see, but here we go. Let's just
Yep.
try this. Let's just do a quick experiment. I'm going to share this with you. Let me get the form. And the sharing tool has changed a little bit here. Anyone with the link, and we want to copy the link, but that's of course being covered by the Zoom tools here. One more time. So we're going to get the share. I thought I meant to embed this. So I'm going to drop that into chat. And if you could just respond to it, it just asks a few basic questions. And you can create a fake name. Don't necessarily put your name there. It's just asking you to put in a name. It doesn't have to be yours. Just provide a list of 4 things that you enjoy doing, maybe hobbies, interests, sports, games, or other things. And also, you could create a fictitious person with career educational goals after college. And this is just used to gather some information on students. Could also be tied to the Tracy Addy and others who's in class form, where you get more information about students. But again, you want to be careful not to include personally identifiable information. And so far, there's 2 responses that I put in last night just so I could test this. There's 3. Just get a few more. We've got 4. We can take a look at the responses. Okay, we've got James Brown. We got Bart Simpson, a biology student, George Kinsley, whose name is familiar, but I don't recognize it. Okay, and so we've got some things: mushroom hunting, reading, soccer, cooking, role-playing games, RTS, which is...
I don't know.
Return to sender? No, I'm not sure, but that's okay. AI will probably know. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're just going to go over to the responses here, and we're going to download those as a spreadsheet. And I'm going to download that spreadsheet. And let's see how it works. So that's going to be downloaded as an Excel file. It'll read Excel, and then we're going to take it over. And I think I did include a prompt.
Previous slide,
On
I
a
think.
different, yeah, but it was a different, was it the previous
I
slide?
think so.
There it was.
Yep.
So, so here's just in the question asking about opportunity cost, just to illustrate this, but you could pick something that's relevant for your class. And we're going to go into ChatGPT, put in that prompt, and then we're going to attach that spreadsheet. We're going to add from, not from Google Drive, although I guess I could have. We're going to attach that and upload from the computer, and it's going to be the responses here. And now it just asks to an authentic assessment activity for each student, which students will learn about opportunity costs in a way that is aligned with our hobbies, interests, and our career goals. So let's see what it does. It's read in that information. And here we go. It has created a spreadsheet for each student with an activity. Let's try that again. So actually, it's probably easy if I download this, so that way we can look at the whole thing. Opportunity cost activities for students has a CSV file, so you could read it in with Excel. And let's just expand that so we can see all of it. And that's going to, I don't use Excel that much. I use mostly Google Sheets.
I think you just grab it and drag it. That's usually what I do.
Well, okay, but yeah, I wanted to do it so it would wrap.
Oh, okay.
And well, yeah, in any case, yeah, we need to get that wrapping, which could have been one of the activities, but where is word wrap in here? Anyone know offhand? I used to know, but I rarely use Excel anymore.
I don't use Excel.
Okay, in any case, well, here we go. For one person there, reflect on one of your hobbies, content creation, how much time you spend on each week, identify an alternative activity related to your career goal. Of not sure that you could pursue during this time. Analyze the opportunity cost of continuing with your hobby versus focusing on the alternative activity. That gets to it. It may be a little harder to come up with a not sure, but still. And let's go down to this one. This was let's get possible data loss. There we go. Come on, there's got to be an easy way of getting the word wrap without. Partly this Zoom window keeps covering everything. Wrap text, there we go. So we're going to choose this and do wrap text. It was covered before.
No, it's not.
And it's not wrapping text.
John, you need to save the document first because it's on a viewer mode, so you can't really work on the file.
CTS puts in those requirements that we can't, okay. I forgot. And that's one of the reasons why I don't use Excel. Okay. So we'd have to save it and reopen, and it's just not worth it, which is why by switching to.
You might be able to, can you make it big? Right there?
Well, oh yeah,
Make it big
yeah,
enough?
there we go.
Yeah.
Because that is at least creating this. So let's choose another one. Reflect on your hobbies running, consider how much time you spend on it. That's kind of a similar one in each case, but this is not as creative as it often is. So if you're not happy with what it did, you can come back and say, create more varied questions or prompts. Because right now they all seem to be a simple way of reflecting on one of these things. Well, they've rephrased it a little bit, but it's still pretty much the same.
Yeah.
But in any case, this illustrates the basic concept that if you collect data from your students on what their interests are, you can always use AI tools. And I should have polished that up a little bit more before trying it live here. But in any case, you can customize assignments so that they align with the interests of students in some way. And if you have more information on each student and you have perhaps better prompt than opportunity cost, you might be able to get some fairly different assignments there. And if you do that at the very beginning, you can use that throughout the course to keep generating some responses. Or if you just have a general anonymous form about student interest, you can use that to help design learning activities throughout the class that are aligned with students' interests, so that you're not just coming up with things out of your own knowledge or experience, you're tying it more directly to the actual interests and talent, interests and interests and skills and career goals of your students, potentially.
And that actually, so one of the assignments that I give in my writing classes is I have my students choose like a community that they belong, right? Like they identify like something that they're interested in, or something that they really like to do, either something they want to learn or, a hobby or sports or whatever. They identify that early on, and then I lead them through a series of brainstorming exercises. Some of those brainstorming exercises use AI and some don't. But this would be a really cool thing. Like I could have them collect all of those interests in the Google form and then have come up with like a series of different prompting questions, right? Given those interests, which would be like another really cool way to kind of begin brainstorming that project as well.
Yeah, and this doesn't require AI, as Stephanie said. In fact, these recommendations have been made for years by people focusing on inclusive teaching. Find out what your students are interested in and try to connect what they're learning as much as possible to that. This is just a way of automating that a little bit.
And it's, yeah, just another option, like we've talked about earlier today, about how one of the things that I think is so cool about AI is that, although I try really hard to switch things up and keep things new and fresh, like mostly for me, but for them too, right? Sometimes I get stuck, and like having alternative ways to approach assignments or do activities, come up with examples for them, I think that this is a really helpful tool for all of those things.
And it keeps it fresh for students, but also for us. And if
Yeah.
we're doing something that's different, we tend to be a little bit more, a little more focused on it, or a little bit more engaged with it than if we're just doing the same thing over and over again, semester after semester.
Yep. Yeah. Perks us up a little bit.
And in general, we've talked about this in other sessions too, discuss guidelines for appropriate and ethical use of AI based on course learning objectives and likely future disciplinary use of AI. And consider discussing ethics and transparency about AI and writing with students. When do we need to know how AI was used? I think that was your question.
Yep. So this will be something, and like, again, for all of these sorts of things, as you're designing authentic assessments for your courses, you think about and you determine how much you want to involve AI or how little, if at all, right? So depending on what you want to do, if you are going to work AI into the process, you want to be as transparent as possible with your students about how they can use it. So like, I will say that like my students, I kind of give them, it's sort of in the middle, right? Like, I don't want them to totally use AI. And if they don't want to use it at all, then that's okay for like final writing assignments and things, but I have them do different experiments with it throughout the semester. But one of the things that they are most concerned about, and this is something that we've had conversations about in class, they write to me about it, we talk all about academic integrity and what that means. And their biggest concern is that they're going to, and I say this genuinely, right, that they're going to accidentally violate academic integrity if they use AI, because they're so worried about it. In my courses, they're really worried about it. So for me to say, okay, here's what's okay and here's what's not. Ask me questions. Here are guidelines on all of the assignment sheets. If you're not sure, like I let my students revise things, so I can point out and all of these sorts of things, because for me too, it's still new-ish to use it in a classroom, right? So I tell them, listen, if something comes up, let's work through it together, right? So I think especially they're really nervous about doing the wrong thing, not on purpose. Some of them are doing the wrong thing on purpose, and that's a whole other thing, but many of them are really scared about being penalized for violating academic integrity when they're using AI, but like they use it kind of incorrectly, if that makes sense. I don't know if that came out well.
A really good thing to do also is that aspect of future disciplinary use. It's still kind of new, but most firms out there are using AI in some way, the vast majority of firms. But in many disciplines, the type of work if you're doing statistical analysis, you might very well use AI in a variety of ways, perhaps in alternative modeling, or perhaps in locating data sources, or in suggesting alternative models or interpretations, perhaps. And, it would be good to let students know ways in which people in their future careers are actually using AI already, so that they can learn what's appropriate in ways that they may want to develop some skills so that they enter that career or enter that disciplinary field ready to start using the tools that the discipline is already using.
Yep, absolutely. And I'll say too, just as like a quick plug because, like our students, for me, because I work with a lot of freshmen, they're worried about like college, like now, right? So I do talk to them kind of about the future, but for a freshman, it's hard for them to think so far down the line at that particular moment in time sometimes. So one of the things that I like to do is then talk with them in class, but then also give them resources that they can refer back to kind of help guide them along the thing. So like Emily Mitchell from the library has pulled together a really wonderful AI guide that's on Penfield's site that talks all about things like citation, like what kind of like general things for students to think about. But you know, they're worried. My students are always worried about things like citations. So to have like guidelines, okay, if you're going to use ChatGPT, here's how you cite a chat in MLA style, right? You can look up and show those things with your students, which I think helps alleviate some of their nervousness about the whole thing.
And the next slide suggests when you're designing your courses, using transparency and connecting what the students are doing with the course learning objectives. Use a backwards design approach. And again, we strongly advocate that people consider using the TILT approach, the transparency and learning and teaching approach of Marianne Winklemas. We've talked about that in a number of sessions. But if students know that every task you're asking them to do has some benefit to them at some later stage of their education or career, they're much more likely to buy into it than if they think you're just forcing them to jump through these hoops that don't have any meaning to them. So letting them know that there's a connection between the goals of the course and what you're asking them to do. And it's not just you creating barriers to them and imposing these things on them. So it can really help. Let them know that there's a reason for the assignments you're asking them to do and explain what that reason is.
And kind of connected to that, in addition to giving them, you know, like sort of practical skills that they can take with them after college. And I know I keep saying this, but it's true. Like when they are first semester students, right? They're juggling a whole bunch of different things, right? Like they're juggling classes, they're trying to figure out how to do college to begin with, right? So one of the things that I tell them, I give my freshmen like a scaffolded writing project. So a writing project that they do in pieces. And I tell them that one of the huge reasons for doing that is that they can learn to manage their time while they're doing this project, right? Because it's broken up into small pieces to try to make it more manageable for them. They also get feedback on every single piece of that scaffolded project. They have opportunities to revise based on my feedback for every part of that project, if they want to. And the other nice thing about it is that if you scaffold, you can make the individual assignments be weighted a little bit lower, a little bit more manageable. So it tends to help alleviate that huge nervousness that they have. You know, instead of doing something that's worth 50% of their overall grade, they're doing something that's in 10 different pieces that's worth 50% of their overall grade or whatever, right? I don't even do it that high, but like it gives them more opportunities to screw up, fix their mistakes and learn and move forward, which I think helps with the nervousness quite a bit.
And if you allow redos on those early stages where the work is still fairly simple and so forth, it makes it so much easier for you to manage the grading and providing that feedback. And if students know that there's no real cost to making a mistake, that they can learn from that and then they can overcome, they can improve their work, and that's what will be reflected in their grade, it reduces the incentive to engage in academic integrity violations. So we wanted to open it up to people to talk about what types of authentic assessments you have used and what might you consider for future use. We'll stop the share for a minute. Anyone? What types of things have you done or would you like to do or have you considered doing, and how has it worked? We've been doing more of the talking. Let's hear from you guys. Well, Jessica.
I was gonna say with the little survey, the student check-in kind of, I've done that. It's been really successful. I've been able to tweak it a little bit, like that was like a kind of a student introduction type of thing. But I've also used it in other ways throughout the semester to see, you know, kind of a check-in, how things are going. And that's been really successful for me because I think students feel like they have ownership in the course. And when you make the changes or you make any tweaks based on their feedback, they feel really good about that. They feel like their voice has been heard. So.
Yeah, giving students that autonomy, the sense that their voices matter, makes a huge difference in terms of student motivation.
Jessica, do you do that survey anonymously or do they say who they are?
I do it anonymously.
Okay.
Yeah. Because I also have check-ins. I want them to feel like they're open to tell me if they don't like something, right? So I do it anonymously, but I also have check-in times where if they are struggling and they have a specific thing that they want me to know, like I'm struggling with this, they can meet with me face to face. So I have other kind of resources for that, but I do keep it anonymous because I feel like I get more information.
And I've used both anonymous and with information from students in terms of an opening document. The advantage of anonymous is that students feel more comfortable revealing things that perhaps they may not be as willing to share. Or willing to share identified to them. But when I've also had students even in large classes of up to 400 students work in an introductory discussion forum where they share their interests, their hobbies and other things. And I ask other people to respond to that and so on. And I've always tried to use it to see what the main sorts of interests are and do a little cloud thing to see what the most common themes were and use that to try to customize some of the examples that we'd use in class and so on. But giving students the opportunity to share privately with you anything. I also ask students to share with me privately any barriers that they might expect to see in their classes and so that we can work to overcome that. So
I've done like check-ins, like I've done some anonymous ones with like Google Forms, but because I teach writing, they're mostly written. So like I'll have them do like different reflective type activities kind of throughout the semester. And just kind of say like, listen, answer these questions. I'm grading you on whether or not you answered the questions, right? Like, so like if you turn in your responses, like then you get the A, right? Like, so say what you want to say because like I want to hear what you have to say, which I understand is still very intimidating for many people. But some of them are incredibly honest, which is really, really wonderful. And again, I try to respond to everything because I think it's important, when you teach writing to give written or some kind of feedback. So responding and encouraging them to say like, yes, you did this well. I enjoyed reading your thoughts, whatever I think is important.
and that's not important just in writing. That's
Sure,
important
yeah.
everywhere. Giving students some sort of
I
positive
was just
feedback.
gonna say, even the alignment, again, to one of the sessions I did on teaching through a wellness-centered approach, just even doing these little surveys, whether they're anonymous or not, or the little one that John had just showed, those help with our students' mental well-being and their overall wellness. So there's a lot of these, inclusive practices and active learning strategies that are directly aligned to, our wellness, and our students wanting to, continue here as an institution. So I really enjoy that part of it too, as a health educator.
Anyone else? Okay, well, I think that was the last slide, I believe, or no, there was one more thing. And the last slide was just some additional resources. Let me share that. And this has some additional resources. I'm not sure why. There we go.
I think it's the original one, right?
Hmm?
It's the original slide too with the resources.
No,
It's a
these are
different-
additional
okay.
references. So
Okay.
let me move this out of the way so we can see it a little bit better. It's so hard using one screen. I usually use two, but we're in a different room. So here AI assessment resource, AI assess resources. And here's some articles on this. Some ways in which you could use AI for this. Here's some podcasts on ways in which people have embedded authentic assessment into their classes. Chilton Reynolds and Ed Beck from SUNY Oneonta talked about that. Jessica Kruger has done that throughout her discipline, which is something related to healthcare. I forgot the exact title. And then she also had students do a just-in-time textbook. Here's a podcast that I did with some of my students when they created their first book. And there they talk about how much they valued it and the fact that they got to see this work and share it, and they can still link to it. It's on their LinkedIn profiles. And again, they were talking about how happy they were to be able to show their parents what their parents had contributed so much money to helping them achieve. And here's a podcast we did last fall with Michelle Kukaleka Hamas, who's been using infographics projects as a form of authentic assessment, where students, it was in a political science class where students were creating infographics related to certain policy issues, presenting the arguments on either side of the issue. And they just valued it so much more than typical or the other types of assignments she had been using prior to moving to infographics a few years back. Okay, any questions or comments or thoughts?
Yeah, John, could you please share the slides and these resources?
Well, I
Oh,
didn't
can
quite
you
get-
share the slide?
Oh, yeah, the
Yep.
slides, let me go back. Yeah, the slides were right at the beginning. I'm gonna share this, there we go. And let's go to the slides. My next session will be in the other room, sorry. We scheduled this one here, okay, here we go.
Yeah.
So we want to share that, and I will put that in chat. Oops, that's not it. That's, sorry. That was the prompt. One more time. I'm going to, I shared it, I copied it. Sorry, various things are popping up and opening right on top of it. So I'm going to share that and one more time, share, copy the link and paste the link. There we go. Okay, so yeah, these are the slides.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And the links to the resources are in the slides themselves. Okay, we'll stop the recording and thank you all for coming, and we'll see most of you at future sessions.
Bye.
Bye.